Welcome to this video manual on Mosaic version 1.0. Mosaic is a rhythm and harmony sequencer for the Norns platform. Its intention is to allow you to create entire songs on one unified sequencer system. And you do this by both sequencing your hardware in your studio over MIDI or in combination with using internal Norns sound sources using the NB ecosystem. It's important to understand that in this video I'm using only NB devices, so sound sources running off the Norns hardware itself. And whilst this is perfectly possible, as you saw in the jam at the start of this video, it's very easy to overwhelm Norns, leading to distortion. Mosaic can very quickly fire many notes, particularly if you're using faster sequencer times, chords, and arpeggios. And this is all perfectly fine when sequencing MIDI hardware. But when using many NB devices across multiple channels, it can quickly lead to distortion. So please be careful. You'll hear later in the video the sound cuts out a number of times, and that's because I hit distortion whilst experimenting filming this video. I've cut out the distortion to protect your ears, but yeah, just generally be careful and favour MIDI over NB devices if you want to create an entire song. Now in this video manual, I'll be showing you the basic functionality and navigation. Let's get stuck in. So when you first come to load Mosaic, you will find yourself on a screen that looks like this. So Mosaic is organized around several grid-based pages. Each grid-based page also has a set of sub-pages on the Norns screen. Mosaic is grid first in that you can usually get by with many of the tools that you need to create a song on the grid, and then the Norns screen provides secondary functions and settings. Mosaic itself is organized around pages on the grid, and those pages are navigated using the key menu navigation buttons, which are these four on the bottom row here. The first of the four menu buttons takes you to the channel editor. Mosaic is formed of several key components, one of which is the channel. You have 16 channels to work with. Each one represents a sound source or a device. Each channel can be made up of multiple patterns, and these patterns can be combined in interesting ways using what's known as merge modes, which we'll cover later. A channel can have 1 to 16 patterns assigned to it, and we'll cover what a pattern is shortly. The next page in the global menu is the scale editor. So you have 16 scale slots to work with on Mosaic, and scales apply to the patterns. Patterns don't have note information on their own. Patterns are made up of triggers, notes, velocities, and lengths, and the notes are relative to the currently selected scale slot. And we'll dig into this more later in the manual. The third page is the pattern editor, which is actually a set of 3 pages, and you can navigate through the 3 pages by pressing the third menu button here multiple times. The first page on the pattern editor is the pattern trig editor. So this is where you assign triggers to your 16 patterns. The second page is the pattern note editor. This is where you assign note information to your 16 patterns. And then the third is the velocity editor, which is where, funnily enough, you assign velocity information to your 16 patterns. And last but not least, the song editor. This is where you take your patterns and you sequence them together to form songs or sections of songs. As explained earlier, each page has corresponding subpages on the Norns screen. So on the channel editor, for example, you have a note dashboard which displays the currently playing note, note masks, which we'll cover later, trig locks, a clocks section, and a section for configuring the device on the currently selected channel. To navigate through the pages on the Norns, you use encoder 1, and on the top of the screen you can see the currently selected page denoted by the dashes and the title of each page. When you are in a page, the currently selected parameter is brightly lit, and you can change the selected parameter using encoder 2. Once you have selected a parameter, you can set that parameter's value by using encoder 3. When a parameter is set to X, this means that it is off and it does not affect your current pattern in any way. In general, some parameters require an action to confirm before that change is applied to your pattern. When you are asked to confirm, it is the third button that applies, with the second button generally acting as cancel. The third button also applies as a shift key for many functions. In general, when you have a function that requires a long press, for example, on the channel page, to mute a channel, you hold down that channel's button. If you want to apply this immediately, you hold down Shift and press once. So we can mute and unmute directly by holding the Shift. To start and stop the sequencer, we use the start-stop key, which is the bottom lower left-hand key on your Norns grid. Press once to play, and once again to stop. Okay, so let's take a look at the pattern editor, which, if you recall, is the third button in the menu cluster. The first of the pattern editor page is for entering trigs onto your pattern. You can do this by using the steps, which is this cluster of 64 buttons, with the first being step 1, the last being step 64, and anything in between. You can enter values as you would in a XOX style sequencer. But as well as manually entering the trigs, you can also use one of 4 algorithms that are there to assist you. These 4 keys here, select your algorithm. You have a drum algorithm, which has 5 banks of 127 presets each. You have a bank of random values, a bank of common bass drum patterns, common snare drum patterns, close hi-hat patterns, and open hi-hat patterns, with the bass drum, snare, and hi-hat patterns being related to one another. To select the current pattern within your bank, use this fader. You press the middle buttons on the fader to coarsely select, and the end caps to finally select. Now you may have noticed that you're not seeing any patterns, and you won't see any patterns until you press the arm button, which is this bottom right-hand button here. By pressing this, you are essentially saying, I want to preview the notes in a currently selected pattern. And they blink to inform you that the notes have not been applied to your currently selected pattern yet. When you want to apply, you press again, and now those trigs are assigned to your pattern, in this case pattern 16. When you come to select another pattern, or indeed the same pattern again, any trigs that would land on a step that already has a trig will turn that trig off. So effectively, you can apply the same pattern again to undo. This is quite interesting later when you come to use more complicated patterns, because you can apply a complicated pattern on top of, for example, a simple one to end up with something completely unique. And again, you can undo by applying that same pattern again. So we've got bass drum, snare drum, close hi-hat, and open hi-hat. As mentioned before, the patterns are related to one another. So the patterns available on pattern 91, for example, this is the bass drum pattern for pattern 91, will have related snare and hi-hat patterns that work well with each other. This means that sometimes you'll get a pattern that doesn't have any trigs on it. So that's the drum algorithm. The second algorithm available to you here is known as tresillo. This takes two patterns from the banks described earlier and combines them together in interesting ways. For example, if we take a look at our snare drum bank and select pattern 64 on the top fader, on the lower fader we can choose a second of the snare drum patterns to apply as a tresillo, which will, depending on the tresillo multiplication factor, change your pattern in interesting ways. So for example, this is the snare drum pattern on the top fader applied normally. This is the same snare drum pattern when tresilloed with itself here, or other patterns as so. And when you change the multiplication factor, you get different results. So a multiplication of 16 tends to lead to more standard patterns across the 16 steps. 8 will lead to patterns across the 8 steps. 24, because it's irregular, will lead to interesting syncopated patterns, and so on. The third algorithm is Euclidean, with the top fader setting the fill and the bottom fader setting the length. And the fourth algorithm is Numeric Repetitor from the NI Eurorack module, with the bank buttons selecting the prime and the faders selecting the patterns. So this is useful for techno and bass drum style beats. So let's go ahead and apply a trig pattern for now. Also on the paint page, you can move your pattern right and left using these buttons here, and to center, press the middle button. So to demonstrate that a bit more clearly, right and left and center. To cancel painting, you can press this button and nothing will be applied. So once you have trigs set, you can now also set lengths. So by default, each trigger has a length of 1 step. If you want to extend out, you can hold your desired step and press the desired length. So the length of the trig is displayed with the lighter colors here. To delete a length and reset back to 1, hold down the step. So let's go ahead and add some lengths here. and some length here. Now, Mosaic, especially with the pattern editors, has a tendency to create very busy patterns. You can counter this, of course, by simply turning off steps to simplify, or you can combine and use the functionality where active triggers to turn off the triggers by applying lots of patterns on top of each other. You can get some really interesting results. I encourage you to experiment. Okay, so now we've got a pattern with some triggers. It looks fairly interesting. Now we can take a look at the note editor and apply some note information to our pattern. So the note and velocity editors are arranged in 16 steps horizontally on the screen, with note values going vertically on the grid. The active triggers are displayed as lightly lit vertically. Now, if you recall earlier, I said that the note information on Mosaic is relative to the currently selected scale. So we can see that the scale slot number 1, which is currently selected, is C minor. So this means that right now, by default, each trigger is set to the root, which means that each trigger is currently set to C. If we were to set one higher, then it would be the second note in the C minor scale, the third note, fourth note, and so on. Note that it's indexed by 0, 0 denoting root. We can also page down to lower note values to get into the minus. And the octave is denoted by a dimly lit horizontal line. Similarly, we can page up, and you'll see the octave again is denoted by the line. To quickly navigate to the end pages, you can hold down the key, and to get back to the root, press the middle key. If you want to quickly apply a step across all 4 pages, hold down Shift and press the desired note, and you'll see that it's been applied across all 4 pages. So let's go ahead and enter some note information very quickly. We'll just make something up here. I don't expect this to sound fantastic, since I'm just demonstrating. So here we have note information applied. Now with Mosaic, it's always useful to add note information to steps that aren't currently active. So even though there's no trigger on these steps, it's useful to have the note information on there. And this will come into play when we look at merge modes later. So now we have some note information on our pattern. Let's go ahead and look at the velocity editor, which is very similar. So it's arranged in 16 steps, and you can page down to lower values here, with the bottom row being 0, the top row being 127. Let's go ahead and use our shift function to quickly enter a fairly rhythmic pattern. We can see that this has been applied across. And we'll go ahead and just move these down a bit lower on page 1 and page 2. 3 rather. Okay, so now we have a pattern that has notes, triggers, lengths, and velocity. Next, let's take a look at the channel editor. So, as mentioned before, the channel editor has 16 different channels, each one representing a different device or sound source in your studio. This could be MIDI devices, so hardware devices controlled by MIDI, or it could be internal devices installed on your Norns as part of the NB ecosystem. On my Norns shield, I only have NB devices. By default, there's a CC device, which can control any MIDI device, but it won't have custom mappings in Mosaic. If you wanted, you could create a custom config file for every hardware device in your studio and have each one listed here, pre-set up so you can quickly select it, have its params appear on the param page, and have each parameter map exactly to your hardware based on things like the minimum value or maximum value of a parameter, even things like labels, and you can configure it so that you can see the parameter very clearly on the screen. On my main Norns device that I have over here, I have it fully configured, but for this tutorial, we're just going to use NB devices. So let's go ahead and select Imperatrice. Now, I happen to know that Imperatrice starts very quiet, so we can go into the Norns menu, navigate to the edit page to get to the parameters, and we can edit the Imperatrice voice directly here, which is part of the NB ecosystem, and this is how the NB ecosystem works. And actually the gain and amp has been set up nicely already. Whilst I'm here, I can show you that you can configure all the params for Mosaic under these channel parameter pages. In the case of NB devices, you'll find what are known as the stock params in this menu, with the device params being in the NB menu as normal. For MIDI devices, you would have a full list of all available parameters here. These params that do appear are, as mentioned, known as stock params. And these params are special because they're unique to Mosaic. They don't alter the sound quality of your sound source. Instead, they alter the quality of the sequencer in some way. So, for example, you could have a random velocity applied to all or some steps, or probability, or so on, and we'll cover a few examples later in the video. In the main Mosaic configuration page, you can save, load, start a new project, and set various sequencer options. So for now, we've got Imperatrice 3 selected. And you can see in the trig lock page now, we have some default parameters that can be edited directly or applied to trig locks available to us. Let's go ahead and apply our pattern that we created earlier, which was in pattern slot 16, to our channel with the Imperatrice, which is channel 16. So we do this by using the pattern select button here, and you can have one, which is this pattern here that we just created, or more selected per channel, and you can have as many as 16 per channel. Patterns can be reused across multiple channels also. Now, the interesting thing is when you have more than one pattern selected to a channel is that they interact in unique ways. So this is our pattern 3, which I created earlier. This is our pattern 16, which I created in this video. Together, it resembles a new pattern that we haven't created at all. And that's because we're currently in a merge mode known as skip, which takes any trigger that appears in both selected patterns and skips them on steps where there's 2 or more triggers. So we'll cover merge modes a little bit more in a minute. First of all, let's hear this pattern. Let's press play. Okay, very good. Let's have something to anchor this with. So on my channel 1, I have oil can set, and I think it's a bass drum. happens if we add this pattern that we looked at earlier? Interesting. So on the channel page, we also have this octave fader here. So we can select the octave. Okay, good. We'll stick to our pattern that we created in the video for now. One of the powerful things about the channel editor is that as well as adding patterns and combining them in interesting ways using our merge mode, you can also enter what is known as masks directly onto the channel itself. So a mask represents a trig, note, velocity, length, and chord information that you add directly to a channel's step. And masks override any information that's coming from the patterns. So in this way, we can, for example, using what is known as step locking, which is a technique that's, if you're familiar with Elektron sequences, you'll understand very quickly. We can override step information by, for example, selecting a trig value here. If we select trig to no, we can see that this trig has disappeared because it's step locked to no. You can see that it's blinking mildly because it has a mask applied. And you can also go ahead and enter other information such as note values, velocity, length, and chord information. To cancel a mask, hold down the desired step that's blinking and press the cancel button, which will clear the masks for that step. Let's go ahead and look at what happens if we change the value without holding down a step. So if you select no for trigger, for instance, it switches everything off. And that's because a value set on the note masks page without holding down a step applies to all steps on the channel. So you can turn everything off, you can turn everything on. Or, more usefully, you can select a default length for all steps, for instance. So you can see all steps are length 2, 3, and so on. Or you can even add a chord value to every step that has a trigger on it. Let's go ahead and make every single trigger a fifth. Or we could go ahead and make it a triad. It's a bit much making every single trigger a chord, but it might sound quite good if we make, for example, just a few a chord. If you want to clear all masks on the channel, you hold down the shift key and press cancel, and that will have removed all masks. So now let's go ahead and re-add our chords. So the masks page is particularly useful for adding melodic content to your channel. The patterns are primarily used for rhythmic and harmonic content. To add melody, you need a little bit more control, and so that's where masks come in. So you can add, for example, triggers directly to a pattern by holding down the shift key and pressing the desired steps directly. or you can turn triggers off by doing the same. When you've added triggers in, you can then go ahead and apply, for example, note information, velocity information. And you can see now that these are set to C1, velocity 105. You may not be able to hear that though because it's quite low. So you can hear these now. So this way you can quite painstakingly create a melody. However, if you've got a MIDI keyboard attached to your Norns, you can hold down a step and tap in the desired notes, including chord notes, onto your keyboard, and it will enter the information for you, which allows you to very quickly create a melody. So let's go ahead and cancel the blocks. Restore us back to where we were. We briefly mentioned the merge modes earlier. Let's go ahead and add this second pattern to channel 16, which is our currently selected channel. So you can see here we've got a number of steps that appear in both patterns, and the note velocity and length information of those two patterns will be combining in interesting ways. For the trigger information, we can use 3 different modes. So the only mode will only choose triggers that appear in both currently selected patterns. The all merge mode will choose all trigger information from both patterns, and the skip merge mode will exclude any triggers that appear on steps shared between the patterns. Let's go ahead and choose all so that we can hear the triggers that are on steps that have information from both patterns. We can use the note merge modes to change the behavior of the note information on those shared steps. Right now we're on average merge mode, so the notes will be averaged on steps that are shared across the two patterns. We can change this to be higher note merge mode, which will add the notes together, so you can hear high notes in the mix now. And then lower note merge mode will subtract, so you'll hear low notes in the mix. Now we've only got a few shared steps here. If you were to add more patterns though, for example, so that you have more conflicting steps, the effect will be more drastic. So we can do the same with velocity, so there's average, higher and lower velocity merge modes. And if you hold shift, you also get the same options for length as well. So, also on the channel editor page, you have access to trig locks. So on the trig locks page, you have access to a default set of parameters depending on the device, and you can alter the values of these parameters directly on this page. For example, changing the model on flats, or changing the harmonic. So changing these values directly on the screen without holding down a button changes it for every step, like with the masks. Or you can go ahead and change for a single step by trig locking, denoted by the blinking step here. And any value can be trig locked, so we can change the model, for example, for this step. And this way you can create very interesting modulation very quickly. To cancel a trig lock, as before with the masks, hold down the step and press the cancel button. Now, I previously mentioned that there are stock parameters to alter the quality of the sequencer rather than the voice. So let's go ahead and select one of those. To change a parameter within the trig lock screen, press the cancel button when you've got a parameter selected. Scroll using encoder 3, and the stock ones are at the top of the list. Let's go ahead and play with note strum. Press K to confirm, cancel to exit, and we can see chord strum is currently deactivated. Let's make this super apparent as to what's happening by going ahead and choosing a triad for every step. And let's go ahead and change the strum value. You need to watch out with plats, however, because it can be quite sensitive to multiple notes playing at the same time. So strum will space out the chord notes. And you can get some pretty extreme values going. You can get some pretty interesting effects going with the chord strum. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and look at channel 2, where I have another inflatress, or maybe channel 3, where I've got double decker even. So one thing that you can do on the channel editor page is change the length of the currently playing pattern. This is particularly useful because you can hone in on aspects of an individual pattern. Let's see what this looks like. Hold the desired start step, press the end step. Now you can see we're repeating this particular section on our channel 3. Or for example, we can take a look at this section. It's very similar. Interesting for rhythmic content, of course. You can create interesting polyrhythms by choosing value such as this. Okay. So one thing to watch out for when you're using NB, of course, is that it is possible to overload the synth engine by having too many notes playing at once. So you do need to be careful when using things such as the clock mods. If you're running the clock too fast, which of course you can, there's many values and you can go super quick, which works fine with MIDI devices. And sometimes, depending on the NB device, it can cause distortion, which you heard earlier. But using the clock mod, you can also slow down the clock as well, which can be helpful. And you can set swing and shuffle values. Here we've got a shuffle applied on this channel. And you can have different types of swing depending on the channel, which can create some very interesting rhythms. Let's go ahead and see what our new pattern sounds like. With a bit of swing. Sounds pretty good. So you'll see that I had this channel on. I've just muted it. And again, you can mute by holding down or shift pressing your desired channel. So on the channel editor, there's also the note dashboard where you can see the last currently played trigger, and the information is displayed by the note velocity, length and chord values. So this line here represents the current scale that is being applied. You'll notice that we've been on step 1 throughout all of this. We can change this by going to the scale editor. The scale editor gives us 16 scale slots to play with. Right now, slot 1 is set to C minor. I selected this earlier. And the subsequent steps are set to C minor, but the various degrees 1 through 7 of the C minor scale. For each scale slot, it's possible to select the root, scale type, degree, the transposition, and the rotation. The rotation allows you to take higher notes and move them down lower onto the scale. Let's cancel this change. So I've already set up the first 7 scale slots to be each degree of the C minor scale. The currently selected scale is the globally default scale, and it's applied across all channels. We can change this and play quite performatively by simply tapping the desired scale. This is useful for performing, but we can also apply scale locks to enable the sequencer to make the changes on our behalf. So let's go ahead and change to the 5th degree on step 5, and then back to the 1st. We can change the pattern length here so that we repeat sooner. And you'll notice that this sequencer, which is a separate sequencer from the rest of our channels, is running more slowly. That's because I've changed the clock modification to be divide 8, which can be useful for chord progressions as it gives you more to play with here. Also on the scale page you have transposition, which is globally applied at the bottom here. Use the end caps to modify the value by 1. Middle buttons are coarse selections, with the middle value being 0. To remove a scale lock, simply hold down the desired lock on the step and press the cancel button as before. So last but not least is the song editor. Now the song editor allows you to take combinations of channels, patterns, scales, locks and chain them together into songs. You have 96 slots. Each one has all this information, all 64 steps, all your global scale progressions and so on. So this allows you to quickly copy the current pattern by holding down, pressing your desired slot, navigate to the newly copied pattern, and it will wait until the end of the pattern before changing. And then you can go ahead and modify your pattern by changing the note information if you want. You can change the patterns, the scale progression. Interestingly, you can change, so you can hear the issue with Effortlessly there, and it's because we're using chords, so be careful with Effortlessly when adding too much information. But we can go ahead and change the pattern length, for instance. Whatever modifications you want. And now, because this song slot is disconnected from this one, even though we've got song mode on, which means it will progress onto the next available pattern, because they're disconnected, it's staying on this one. However, if I was to copy this over here to create a cluster and change into this cluster here, it will cycle between these two slots now. On the Norns, you can change the number of times that a song pattern repeats. And you can also turn song mode off so that it doesn't repeat unless you intervene. So in this way you can create clusters that are separated from each other, and then you can navigate between them when you want so that you can perform your song. Also on the song editor is the global tempo and the global swing and shuffle values. The global swing and shuffle values are applied to all channels that don't have swing and shuffle values applied per channel. Also on the song editor you have a global pattern setting. So the global pattern setting allows you to change the overall sequence length for your currently selected slot. So for example, I've set this slot to 48, and you'll see on channels that have a length longer than this one that it is defaulting to 48. Let's go ahead and make it something like 40 so that you can see. So for channels that have a shorter length, it will continue to be the length that it is set at unless the global pattern length is smaller than this length, at which point it will start to stop off the steps. As with all the faders, the end caps do fine grain and the middle buttons do coarse grain changes. By default, Mosaic auto saves every 2 minutes if you don't perform an action on the grid and the sequencer is not playing. As shown before, you can enter the Mosaic menu and save a project manually, unload, or start a new project, as well as the options which are detailed in the manual. So that concludes the very quick summary of Mosaic. Please do check out the manual. If you've got any questions or feedback, please take a look on the lines thread. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much and enjoy.